Well, hey, y'all. I'm here with two different friends tonight. I've got one of my oldest friends, Noah Bowen, over here. Next door neighbor growing up, also homeschooled. And we have the Peanut Gallery back here. Gabriel Cora.
Thanks, girl.
Very intelligent young man. Wish you were as attractive as you were intelligent. But
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, also
for the camera.
10 out of 100.
No, these guys have been some of my best friends for a very long time. And we've always hung out and casually had very deep conversations. So I'm glad that we get to actually do something productive with it for once. So earlier, Noah and I were engaging in a very deep conversation about Mormonism. And that's because whenever I first met this guy, Noah was a devout Mormon.
100%.
100%. So I'm
Many
just going to...
conversations between Mormonism and Christianity.
Yeah, no, seriously. That was some of the things that shaped a lot of the way I think about the world today. We're also passing around plastic bottled liquor because,
Classy.
Things are expensive.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I'm just going to ask this guy to tell a little bit of his story about where he was back in the day and sort of the things that brought him to where he is today. So why are you here? Why did you change your mind? Basic synopsis.
So, to boil it down a little bit, and then the conversation will probably skew off into a little bit different things. When I grew up Mormon, born and raised.
You grew up born.
I grew up born.
Born identity.
And my identity was Mormonism. Kind of everything circled around it. I mean, just as much as every religion kind of circles around your life, or your life kind of circles around your religion. Your beliefs kind of are your core. So there were, I felt more outcasted because Mormonism, it felt like, was a odd religion, especially amongst the Christianity community that I was raised around. But it was a very devout life that I had.
Tell me about the first time that you drank coffee, because I remember, so for some backstory, if you don't know me very well, I've been drinking coffee since I was like 5 years old. So I was always a huge fan, and whenever I met this guy, it always struck me as extremely odd that he would refuse coffee every time I offered it.
So to start off with, you always told me to become homeschooled. And you and Lance actually converted me to homeschoolism. And because of that, we started riding together to school, to and from school with your mom and Stitch. And you would always have coffee in the morning. I always loved the smell of coffee. The smell of coffee is delicious in and of its aroma. And every morning I would get in the car, I would sit right behind Zach, and Zach would have his beautiful mug of coffee. And I'd smell it, and I'd say, Zach, can I just smell your coffee?
No, he would, though. He would literally take my mug, and he'd just huff it, like he's huffing glue. Like,
yeah, literally. Thank you, Zach. I just needed that, and give it back to you. And that's all I want. And he was like, why don't you just take another sip? Like, just take a sip. And no, I wouldn't take a sip because
you were devout.
I believed not to take coffee. No coffee, tea, or hot drinks, which is a thing, or alcohol, anything like that.
So as far as for the benefit of the viewers and for me myself, what are the negative effects in the Mormon religion of drinking coffee? Like, what is bad about it?
That is a wonderful question. The answer that I was given, which at my age, I mean, I kind of just believed it to be, was, aside from all of the health benefits that come from coffee, it's don't take it because it's a simple thing that you're asked not to do. And if you're asked not to do a simple thing and yet you fail to follow that simple thing, then you are failing as a follower. Right.
So far as
don't do it because it's something nice that you shouldn't do. Sort of basic and like a basic abstinence-based religion, sort of.
Yes.
Qualifications, right?
Don't do this.
You're proving your loyalty. You're proving your fealty by not partaking.
But there's nothing. So as far as the Mormon religion goes, there's nothing religiously basically wrong about the physical traits of coffee or in taking it. It's essentially denying yourself human pleasures in order to prove your fealty towards a religion.
There were actually many talks given by many Mormon church leaders. I can't remember their names currently. Too many drops of alcohol in me.
12 apostles.
Yeah, but well, it was actually one of the 12 apostles.
Wait, are there still 12 concurrent apostles?
Yes,
there's
12,
always.
yes,
I think there are always 12 apostles. As soon as it's like
See, that's what
it's
the
like the
benefit
Pope,
I don't
right?
get by reading the old books, I guess. So like reading the Book of Mormon, I didn't really. Maybe I missed that section.
I think if
but-
you
That's
even
a good
just
question.
I think
a
if
good
you
question.
Google search, you can search the 12 current apostles of the Mormon Church, and I think that there are always going to be 12 apostles. It's like whenever the Pope dies, there's always elected a new Pope.
Just
Gotcha.
like the prophet, there's still a prophet.
So right,
in Mormon
so it's like their version
religion.
of the papacy.
Mm.
The light is like really bugging me, but all right, we shall proceed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what, as far like there's coffee, and then what would be some of the other like human pleasures that Mormons would deny
Verboten
themselves?
items, yeah.
Smoking, the basic of the 10 commandments. Someone said 12 commandments. Wow. 10 commandments, smoking, alcohol,
Which is
sex before religion or sex before marriage.
None of which are in the 10 Commandments, but
Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not
not
commit
covet.
adultery.
I'm trying to think of another.
thou shalt have no
random
gods before me.
rule.
Right.
So the 10 Commandments are still applicable in the Mormon religion.
Yes.
As well as other rules that you build on upon that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Such as the Articles of Faith, which were the kind of more 10 commandments, which actually 13 more commandments, which the Mormon religion is also based upon or founded around, which Joseph Smith wrote, created, desired to make up whenever he wanted to. So,
No, I don't think it was arbitrary, though.
not at all.
No, I think, I don't think Joseph Smith was a con artist, and I used to. I think he was a man of deep conviction in the same way that people who are of deep conviction can often be misled, right? They sort of view their conviction as being more valuable than, reality or other people around them. And if you're charismatic enough, I think that can take you very, very far. Look at the guys like Joel Olsteen.
Yeah.
I think that with my story specifically was when I was about 17, 18, when I had a friend, an ex-girlfriend actually, who told me, like, hey, look more into Joseph Smith and everything that was around him. Look more into prophets and what God designed them to be in the Bible and what you currently believe them to be now, as in past tense of me as a 16, 17-year-old, and how it's completely different than how God designed them to be in the Bible.
Yeah.
And, I looked into it and I was like, why is this different? Why is this completely a coin toss up in the air and hope that it lands, and I'm still currently believing this?
So classically, if you look at the Bible, then the Bible would define prophets as someone who is like a mouthpiece of God.
I mean, there you go. Prophetizes.
They're
mouthpiece of God.
mouthpiece of God, and God speaks through them, and then they translate and show us and give us like the direct message of God. What are you doing
I'm
with
trying
that
to
light?
fix the lighting.
Bothering you.
I'm trying to fix the lighting.
This is
My one
no,
crappy
this is
lamp.
worse.
Hold on. See if this makes it better. Oh,
That's a lot better.
ever so slightly better.
It's better. Just don't touch it.
I feel like you can just like see the oil dripping off of our faces right now.
This is just
So-
pure blackness right over here.
So that's like the classic
That's just
definition. So
he's quarterback.
that would be the classic definition, like
Quadroon.
Christian, of a prophet. What would the like new Mormon definition be of a prophet? How would you guys
I think that
interpret
the
it?
Mormon, I mean, to be fair,
To be fair.
To be fair.
to be completely open, if anybody is Mormon watching this, I haven't been to church, in Mormon church, in years, about 6 years. I mean, since I was 18. So there's a lot that I have forgotten. There's a lot that I still don't follow. I mean, I haven't, listened. I don't even know who the new prophet is. Okay, there's so much that I have completely turned against. But my story with growing up was my parents were so heavily forced, which I think that a lot of Christian religions or Christian families tend to.
I would say it's not
focus on.
necessarily something that is even evangelicalism. It's incredibly common, but I don't think it's something that can be attributed in and of itself to evangelicalism. I think it's more of a cultural force.
Yeah,
Sort of like a conservatism in the sense of, like, we don't trust you with other ideas, right? So we don't
want to give you the opportunity.
I've come to believe that
ideas.
it's sort of like an insecurity when it comes to your own beliefs, right? So the whole basis of, like, why should you not let your kids hear other ideas is because you don't think your ideas can stand up to scrutiny.
So you said
Right.
cultural
Absolutely.
force. I mean, you kind of like can gain that from the other word cult. So, like, how would you kind of compare that? Would you think that Mormonism would be
So
cult-like?
certainly within
Certain
Christian
traits?
circles, it's regarded as a cult, and there's a few reasons why. One of the most commonly cited is that there is sort of such a harsh treatment upon exit. So it's not incredibly, like, it's not like 100% of the time you'll receive this, but if you as a family leave Mormonism, as I understand it, there's a good deal of ostracization, which means most people within the church will not associate with you out of a sense of religious fervor, right? Would you concur with that? Like, granted, like, it was just you and I think your siblings, but not necessarily yourself. Would you say you had sort of, I don't know,
An ostracization? Yeah. I mean, not necessarily to the extent of, get the fuck away from me kind of a thing, but like, it was kind of like a situation where you associate yourself with this group of people and you decide to say no and kind of leave, and you no longer associate with these type of people, and they don't contact you, they don't
right?
communicate with you.
So I mean that's one of the most common markers. There's a lot of markers for a cult. People define it radically different ways, but one of the most common is that sort of thing. Another one is suppression of dissent. Sort of like, would you allow? So this is something that I actually have a lot of issues with. The sort of circles I was brought up in, and that's sort of the same sort of cultish behavior as far as would you allow a speaker who is of a differing denomination or a differing opinion on X, Y, and Z into your church to talk about X, Y, or Z, and it's almost always no, and the reason is because he might try to corrupt our congregation. The idea is that the people are just stupid.
You don't want the
it's
introduction of
almost
new
like
ideas.
you don't want to lose your numbers.
Right. Rather than focusing on teaching your sheep to use the sort of
It's a narrow-minded
evangelical,
thought process.
yeah, right. So rather than teaching your sheep to think, right, you're teaching them what to think, right? And parents, I think, make this mistake a lot, and it's very, very unfortunate. And it's a huge problem in the education system as well. And is that rather than teaching kids how to think, right, you're teaching them how to decide between different ideas, ideas that are opposed to one another. Like, I've got these two ideas, they contradict each other. How do I decide which one is the right one, right? Rather than teaching them that process, right, they teach them what to think, right? It's sort of more of an indoctrination than anything else. And unfortunately, it's very tempting for humans, especially in a position of authority, to sort of treat other people as not being capable of independent thought, not being capable of discerning those ideas, because people are stupid, and people do fall prey to stupid ideas. But that should not diminish the importance of actually teaching them that process. So when you fall prey to that, of course you have to keep out any opposing thought, because your sheep can't handle it. No. Your sheep are incapable of deciding things for themselves. They're incapable of any sort of discernment whatsoever. So they have to only be fed the right ideas, or else they will inevitably fall prey.
Which is a really weird hill to come over, where like you can't think like this. You've been taught this way for such a long time. You can't think for yourself, and all of a sudden you come over this hill where you start thinking for yourself and start, hey, you know what about this idea? What about this idea? What about this idea? and exploring different ideas that may be opposed by the ideas that you've grown up to.
Right.
And it is a huge, it's not a hill, it's a mountain to go over. I remember for myself, it was a mountain to go over. It was a battle, it was a war.
And this sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So with growing up, especially once you've left the nest, essentially. So once you're 18, you're out of the house or whatever age you leave the bubble at, you're going to encounter a battle that I'm afraid most people lose, and that is the battle of discerning good from bad and what your parents taught you. So if you grew up fairly conservative like I did, most of the people that we grew up with, because we collectively grew up together, we knew a lot of the same people, they went off the deep end, and the reason was, rather than separating the baby from the bathwater, as it were, they decided that it was all garbage. They decided,
they're all the good with the bad.
You know what? Like, I can tell that X, Y, and Z, like these ideas that mom and dad taught me are crap. So therefore, it's all crap, and I'm just going to go do whatever I want. Right? Like, they have nothing to offer me. They have everything they said to me has been a lie. Right? That's the common reaction. And there's also another common reaction, much more common than the third option I'm going to tell you about, and that's to say that it's all true, right? And you cling to the security that those ideas give you.
Which is an easy thing to give into.
It's also, it's very easy. I would say it's easier to go the other way and say it's all crap and do whatever you want, because temptation is a common thing with all of us. But it's also easy to say it's all good, because then you're still relieved of the responsibility of deciding for yourself, right? You're relieved of that moral responsibility. So long as someone else is just constantly telling you what to do, you have, I mean, you're just following orders. You're just following orders. You're a sheep. And most people would rather remain that way, as opposed to being out in the Wild West, as it were.
Especially when somebody tells you that it's good to live that way.
So those are the sort of people who we see who never really leave the nest. And it doesn't mean they never get their own jobs, their own houses, or whatever. It means they never leave the ideological bubble that they grew up in. They never question it, and they treat dissent in the same way that their parents did, more or less, or their community did that they grew up in. The third way, which is I think the way the three of us have taken, and this is not to say that, oh, look at us, we're such great examples, because we're not. We're not. But we're not people who would say that we condemn or disdain everything our parents taught us, nor would we concur or follow everything our parents taught us. We are people who have decided to take that responsibility of deciding right from wrong onto ourselves and incorporating everything we learned from our childhood. The constant battle, once again, of growing up, especially once you've left the bubble, once you've left the nest, is deciding and figuring out what your parents taught you that was true and eternal, and deciding what was toxic and needs to perish. I mean, if you were a kid who grew up in a conservative circle and went off to college, you know that immediately. You've seen people who have gone every which way. But it applies also to these sort of fine-tuned things. So
it's kind of an ignorant, almost like a blanket kind of being put in, or not blanket, but a curtain kind of being drawn away from you. It's you're open up to a different ideal or idea set. That's, you have no idea what it is, and it's a very ignorant, but a choice.
Well, it's a very scary thing because it's a step into the unknown, and that's not always good. It's not always good. Then again, it's not always bad. Depends on where you were before. But at the same time, I think it's good in the sense that you're actually taking responsibility and sort of, this is actually something my parents told me for a very long time. It's like, one day you're going to have to make your faith your own, right? It can't be your parents' faith, right? It can't be that you're just believing what mom and dad believe. Like, it's got to be your own thing. And one thing I can say, despite the many mistakes, the many stumbles, and I mean, the many ways in which I might disagree with them, is they were right about that, because I had to make my faith my own. I had to take a step outside and discern truth for myself, and in that process take on the responsibility of, being wrong. Take on the risk of being wrong, right? Rather than letting other people decide what I should think. And it's hard. It really is. But yeah, I think all of us have dealt with that. But Gabe, you've been quiet. I want to hear about your experiences with this, because I think you and I...
So one thing I kind of want to draw back to, we were talking about, like, cults earlier, and you said, part of one of the definitions of a cult would kind of be like not letting new ideas into your followers because you want to keep them indoctrinated. But one thing I kind of want to think about is, where do you draw the protector from the predator? Because if you have sheep, then, are you a shepherd or are you going to be a butcher? Because if you look at, like, let's say different cults, if we classify Mormonism as a cult, then, I mean, if Mormonism is a protector, a shepherd, they want to keep other ideas out of there because they want to protect their following. They want to do what's best for them. But if you look at different cults in the classical sense, you look at Jonestown, you look at who was that Japanese guy that led like thousands?
Dude, I have no idea. We could talk about
you
L. Ron
don't know
Hubbard.
this?
Come on, Zach.
We could talk about.
But
I know that's
I
the
mean, that
one
guy-
thing I don't know.
The one
If you look
thing.
at like predatory
Where's your
cults,
book? Oh,
like
I
if you look
gotta
at
find
predatory cults like Jonestown, where he was preying on his followers, he was abusing them, and he wanted to get rid of them, versus a leader who wants to protect their cults. I just think that's kind of an interesting idea.
I find it hard to make that distinction because I feel like no cult leader, or very few in history, have ever been strictly predatory. Like, I'm going to take advantage of these schmucks. No, I think it's always been more along the lines of
They always
a
start out with best
genuine
interests.
conviction that might be mistaken, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they take it too far, right? They have a bad idea, but because they refuse to let go of it, it goes to its logical conclusion.
It becomes a religion.
Right, which might result in, a few hundred murders, whatever, in the case of Jonestown.
That's fine.
1,000 murders.
Yeah, I don't want to doubt the intention necessarily of these charismatic individuals. I also don't want to doubt the piety. I want to doubt the correctness in a lot of ways. I think if
In the sake of sounding stupid on YouTube, define piety.
piety, it's akin to
Devotedness?
like zealousness. Zeal.
Okay.
Zeal is the proper
Okay.
word. So people who are very pious, you could say very religious people.
They
you
follow
know.
to a T.
Gotcha.
Right. They're very passionate about,
Being
dotting your I's,
religiously
crossing your
correct.
T's.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, I don't want to doubt the piety of these individuals, because I do believe even Joseph Smith and many of the others were they're true believers in their own thing. The problem is that they were mistaken and they didn't have the humility to see it. And as a result, because they refused to let go of that, or they refused to doubt themselves in a very healthy way, they were capable of enormous atrocity. So, yeah. But anyway, where did this start?
Oh,
I was
talking
just-
going back to Gabe.
No, I was just
his story.
thinking about different types of cults and different types of leaders, whether somebody has true nefarious intentions at first, or if everybody thinks that they're truly doing what's best for their followers.
I believe Hitler thought in a certain level he was doing God's work.
Mm-hmm.
Problem was he was wrong. Not only was he severely wrong, but he didn't have any sort of humility to see it, and he surrounded himself with people who were yes men.
He didn't have any checks.
He didn't have any checks and balances, and in the end, he became his own god, in a sense, right? Because he was the ultimate. Like, no one else could check him, even if someone had been there to say, "Hey, Hitler, you're kind of a jerk, man."
And there was no point in checking him. I mean, what would happen if you checked him?
Yeah.
You'd be dead.
He would be dead.
Actually, he would be dead because we kind of did check him, and
Well,
if you
we
believe
checked
the
him
Russian account,
hard
that is.
enough.
We checked himself and he wrecked himself. That wasn't grammatically correct, but I still like it.
Yeah. No, but
Well, Zach, tell me your story and why you brought this into creating a video about this.
well, the Mormonism story is always very interesting to me for a good reason. It's because all of us have grown up in particular circles, and most of us don't agree with everything that we grew up with. The question is, how do you extract the values out of what you grew up with, right? The things that are actually valuable in life as an adult, you could say the things that are objectively, eternally valuable from the things, it could be mistakes our parents made, or it could be mistakes that the ideology that we grew up with made. How do we reconcile those differences? How do we go about living life without completely forsaking our upbringing? How do we go about life in a way where we're making decisions for ourselves, but we're also taking into account all of the experiences that we have? So, I don't know. So, Gabe, specifically with you, because I feel like on this front, you and I have probably a little bit more in common than Noah and I do, as far as the circles that we grew up in, at least. Because, well, we already talked about Noah's circles, but...
I was secluded over here.
I've always felt like there's a certain group of people, people who have been on this podcast, who grew up in the same circles, and they don't entirely reject the sort of philosophy that they grew up with, but then again, they've disassociated themselves from the bubble. So what's that been like for you? Because you're not a person I would look at and say you're an angry, pissed off, 23-year-old who, just wants to rebel against God and the world, and I don't know. You don't have like a Ted Kaczynski cabin somewhere. Like you've come out well-adjusted, and you've got your own very nuanced views on things. So what's that process been like for you, just as a brief overview?
So for me, as far as kind of living on my own, like it basically probably be classified as life after high school. So like I grew up probably the same as you, like classic in the Christian church, non-denominational, go to church every week. And like you said, it's mainly comes down to discerning the good from the bad. So the good lessons from the bad lessons that your parents taught you. So, I mean, I've learned a lot of things after moving out, but a lot of things stay with you. So, I mean, you always have your good lessons that you keep with you, but...
So, actually, that brings a question to my mind, is like something that was different for me that is still a kind of a question to me, is that amongst Christianities, like I go to this church and I hear from this person, the way that they teach is different than I go to this church and they teach this way, and I like the way that this person teaches, so I go to this church. Is that correct in my...
Yes.
Different denominations.
Yes.
So with that,
even within like non-denominational, like I go to Blank's church up in Castleton. It's the greatest. He's the best expositor I've ever heard. As opposed to Joe Schmo down there in Greenwood. What a schmuck.
Exactly. But something that I found kind of either comforting or a surety within the Mormon religion was that no matter what church you went to, whether it was here in Indiana or down in Georgia, or my family was from Georgia, so I every time I visited family, I would go to church down there. It was the same message. No matter who was teaching it, it was something that was still that similarity, that still, again,
like that same nuanced style.
Not something that was like, I don't like the way this person teaches, I don't like this church, I don't want to go here. I still go to that church because I know the same stuff they teach was the same stuff I would go from home.
Right, and unity within Christianity is a huge discussion. In fact, that's why a lot of people I've known and grown up with have moved to either Catholicism or Orthodoxies because they're in pursuit of that. Right, because it's the same way once you get in those circles. Like Michael is Orthodox now, and it was for that reason. I can't get on board with that. I'm a firm believer in the idea that we as humans have a God-given faculty. That's reason. And that reason is ultimately our ability to decide or to discern between ideas, right?
But there's so many.
It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying everyone has the same capacity to do it. I'm saying everybody has the capacity in one level or another. And I mean, that's the ongoing struggle, though. That's for people like you and me. Once again, this ties back exactly into what we've been talking about. We've come out into the world. We've left our bubbles. We've left the nest. And we're looking back at everything we grew up with. And some people choose to either completely reject it, right, which gives you absolutely no rules, ultimate freedom, and ultimately a lot of danger and destruction if you're not careful. Or you choose to completely adopt everything so that you don't have to think for yourself, which is actually crazy comforting.
Yes. So that kind of brings the question of how would you know, aside from just, I like this person because of, it makes me feel good.
Within the evangelical community, right.
And that's the thing, off of faith, but
Right, and within the evangelical community, there's enormous pressure to check yourself when it comes to that, like, why are you going to church?
Yeah.
Right, and like Gabe and I have heard a dozen messages on that. So it's actually kind of a healthy culture in that regard. Where I would say it's unhealthy is the idea that you should be receiving all of your information, all of your teaching from one source, right? Which means it's not about, because all of them will try to sell it under the guise of, well, this is just the word of God and this is the way it is, without testing to see. I mean, you're not
questioning,
right? Not questioning. It's not like you're questioning God's authority or God's word. You're questioning human interpretation of God's word.
Yeah.
You're questioning human fallibility, which is 100% a factor anywhere you go. So it's kind of like trying to understand what's happening in the news, right? You can go to CNN, you can go to Fox, you can go to MSNBC, you can go to these different sources, and you're each going to, from each of them, you're going to get a different piece of the story. If you really want to understand a story fully, you need to explore as many sources as possible, right? You need to hear the pros, the cons, the arguments, the counter arguments, and discern for yourself based upon the faculty that you have. I'm not saying it's a subjective thing, like, Susie came to this conclusion, but Bob came to that conclusion, and they're both right. No, I'm saying we both have, or all of the players involved, all of us have an inherent ability to decide or to discern between ideas. Mathematically, we've sort of classified that as logic, right? We can write it down in literal rules. Like when we talk about like different fallacies, like the genetic fallacy, right? But really, it's something that's inherent in all of us, to one degree or another. So the fallacy that I think that pursuing unity for the sake of unity has is that it completely forsakes human fallibility, right? Because yes, everyone's unified on what, but we don't know if this what is actually good, right? There's no way of testing that. There's no way of checking that. Right, it's like getting all of your news from one source and being okay. It's kind of the same as like just sticking with your parents' views on everything. That way, you've got an insane sense of unity. You probably have good familial relations with your parents or your circles that you grew up with. But at the same time, you have to forsake questioning anything. And that's exactly the risk that people of not necessarily just Mormonism, but those sort of unified, or what do they call organized religions?
Organized. And for the sake of questioning, if then the, religion should be this, God should be the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? So then if religion is being taught to be true to the words of God, then why should we question it? Which is a wonderful argument
because you're not
towards
because
unity religion.
You're not questioning God's authority, and in a sense, you're not even questioning His word. What you're questioning is the interpretation of His word.
Exactly. Okay. So,
right.
Okay.
So you're not. The problem is not with God's fallibility. The problem is with human fallibility.
So then we're questioning our own interpretation. Okay.
Right, or like, for example, like we talked about cults earlier.
I'm sorry, I gotta go to the bathroom.
All right, you do whatever. You want to move over to Noah's seat there. Close the door whenever you're gone. Thank you. But you're questioning not God's fallibility. You're questioning human fallibility. And we talked about cults earlier. Sort of like there's lots of people who have a lot to gain by certain theologies, right? So you're questioning their own incentives, their own nefarious motives, and their own bents.
Yeah.
You're not questioning God in and of himself. You're questioning their delivery of information.
That message, yeah.
Yeah.
So their human translation of it. But I think kind of drawing back to Noah's original question, like he said that whenever he would go to church, like in Georgia, it'd be the same as the church where he went, like where in Indiana, so
Right.
kind of like that, you could kind of draw that the same way as most organized religion. If you're looking at Catholicism, like Catholics, like, yeah, they all have their own church that they go to, but their message, their mass, like, it'll mostly be the same whichever church they go to,
Right.
The teaching is always going to be the same. I think when you compare that to Christianity, I think that, like, let's use those three: Mormonism, Catholicism, Christianity. Christianity, I think you can kind of draw that it'll be the same way if you go into different denominations. So if you go into a baptismal denomination, then
Like
I think that message will be...
Baptismal, like Baptist?
Yeah, like
Okay.
Baptist. If you're going to a Baptist denominational church, I think that message will essentially remain the same if you go into another one 50
Right.
states away.
Right, and that's exactly, I think, the flaw that we've come to. So in 1 Corinthians, Paul really rails on this,
Yeah.
the idea that let there be no divisions among you.
Yeah.
And I don't think it means, the Catholics interpret that to mean like there's one Catholic
True
church.
religion.
Right, which means we need to top down moderate all of the content. We
Yeah.
need to basically decide the absolute truth from the top down and decide exactly what we're going to teach everyone from every level.
Yeah.
I think it should be bottom up.
Yeah.
I think that the real way, especially if you want to fix the church in America, is to, rather than discouraging debate, rather than discouraging dissent, you actually bring it in. Because if you really have faith that your ideas are true and can hold water, then they will stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
They will stand up to scrutiny.
The scientific process.
Right. I'm
like
not saying I have infinite faith in people's ability to discern reason or to apply reason. I'm saying I have more faith in that universal God-given faculty than in certain individuals deciding what should be true for everyone else.
Or picking and choosing different parts of the Bible. So
Right.
if you look at like different denominations of the church, like I was never brought up Protestant, I was never brought up Baptist, I was never brought up Nazarene, If you go to any of those churches, I can always say probably the message will mostly be the same, but I was always brought up in a non-denominational church, which
Right.
I'm sure that you were brought up the same, but every week
Same.
the message would be derived from the Bible, and it would, at least I would like to think that the message would be at the basis, purest form, what we can interpret God's word. I'm sure
Right,
individual by
the
individual,
ultimate
there's
authority
always going
that
to be
they're
a
appealing
bias.
to- the ultimate authority they're appealing to is the literal text.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think it's very much preferable to a variety of what do you call it, the denominations, the versions out there, because it's non-denominational. Baptist Light is what it really turns out to be, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I think that's more due to cultural pressure than anything else. I don't want to speak for everyone who grew up in the non-denominational circles, but I do think it treats itself as a denomination in the sense that there is, at least from church to church, a consistent message that is decided top down, right? There is the same sort of fear of dissent, and rather than encouraging conversation, right, about whatever controversial topic may arise, they tend to more or less, in one way or another, chase out people who disagree. And I can't get behind that. And it's very unfortunate because, once again, I think it communicates a weakness in the sense of, do you really think that your doctrine can stand up to dissent? Can it hold up in the face of scrutiny? And
Well, sorry to interrupt, but
you're gonna have to lean in a little bit more to the microphone,
Okay.
my bud.
so then in that case, you're saying, can your doctrine hold up to the face of
Right. It's the same
scrutiny,
sort
right?
of principle that we have in science. It's basically like, every paper has to go through a process of peer review, right? Right. People are going to actively critique it, right? And it's important, even if it's the best paper that has ever been written, that it goes through that process, because people it has to go through that process in order for people to understand how right it may be or how wrong it may be, depending on the paper.
Well, to be the devil's advocate.
To be Deadpool's advocate.
Deadpool's advocate.
Red Bull's advocate.
To be the oh my gosh.
Devil's
the
advocate.
devil's
To
advocate.
be fair, huh?
To be fair. A lot of answers to scrutiny, to the questions, to the, there's a million reasons why not to do this, but there's only one reason to do it, is faith, right? Would you...
See, I don't believe in blind faith. I believe in reasonable faith.
Okay. Explain more.
So it's very popular in evangelicalism, unfortunately, this idea that we have to have blind faith, and that's not what most of the apologists would say, and that's definitely not what most of the church fathers would say. The idea that you have to believe in something despite the evidence, I think that's absolutely insane. I think it's inane to basically put something against all of observable information. It's one thing like if you know something to be true and then you've got like a short period of circumstances that make you doubt it, right? That's one thing, right? But if you're talking about a doctrine that is completely it seems to go against everything observable reality tells you, long-term, short-term, whatever, then I think you've got good reason to doubt it. I think there's a good chance. So Galileo was actually a big person who put this up because he was one of the people in the early scientific community who went against the Catholic Church in saying, I believe it was that the sun was not... Well, the sun was the center of
the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Yes, everything revolved around the sun.
Right, everything that we revolved around the sun. And he wrote, I forget to whom, but he made this basic argument. He said, like, there are two books. There's the book of God's Word, which is, Scripture. And then there's the book of God's works. And that's observable reality, right? These two are both equal works of God, and they must necessarily reconcile. Which means if we perceive a contradiction between the two, it's usually not because our observation of the universe, or it might be because our observation of the universe is wrong, but it might also be because our
human error
interpretation of Scripture is wrong. They must reconcile. It has to be reasonable, right? So I don't believe that you should deny your reason for the sake of faith. I think I believe in reasonable faith, and I'll put it like this. Let's say you've got a friend who's given you advice 99 times. 99 times his advice has been spot on, perfectly right. The 100th time, you have reason to doubt him. But you take his advice anyway because you know he's been right 99 times before. Is that unreasonable? No, it's perfectly reasonable to take his advice because even that it might appear that he might be wrong this 100th time.
He's been right 99
Experientially, reasonably,
shows.
his track record shows that he's right 99 out of 100 times,
So why
right?
not?
So why not?
That 1/100th of a chance that you become wrong?
Right. So you can look at scriptural revelation in much the same light. Like, I like to look at it this way. Let's say you give you travel back in time. We're doing Back to the Future here, and we go back to 1850, whatever.
Great
and
movie, by the way.
You give someone a car,
Movie.
and you just leave it to him, all right? Now, he can figure out how that car works by...
He wouldn't be able to make it into the car.
Right. Well, we'll get there. By careful inspection, he can take it apart. He could probably figure out how to put it back together again, right? Painstakingly, he could figure out how that car works, right? And he might even be able to duplicate it. Maybe. Maybe. Okay.
Depends on
for
where
the sake
in time
of
you
the,
go.
For the sake of
It's
the
doable.
example, right?
Okay.
He might be able to at least figure out how it works,
Yes.
right? Now, let's say you go back to that same guy, you give him the car, and you give him an owner's manual that contains all that information, right? So I like to view as Scripture as being that owner's manual, right? It'll give you the shortcut answers, but it won't teach you how to actually operate the vehicle, right? It'll teach you all of the answers, but it won't actually give you the experiential application of that information, right? And playing with the car itself is is general revelation, the book of God's works, as it were, as Galileo put it. That is the actual experience. Like, you can gain both sets of knowledge from each side of the coin, right? But it's best if you have them both together. It's best if you have them both together. the underlying premise to all of this is that human reason is capable of deriving the information from both. All right, we want to say anything else, or we want to wrap up here? 45 minutes?
45 minutes.
We've
45
got
minutes?
40 seconds. Noah, take us out.
40 seconds. Well, I would like to say that Back to the Future is a great movie.
Excellent.
Heavily agree.
Honestly, Dr. Brown, he's just a genius in his own right, even though he illegally stole that
Plutonium.
Plutonium,
Yeah.
thank
What a
you. I was
jerk.
going to say raridanium, which isn't real.
No. 1.21 gigawatts.
I would also say that in the sake of the holiday that just happened recently, I am thankful for Thanksgiving. I think that it is... Personally, I think that it should be more popular than Christmas.
Now we're over 45 minutes.
I'm sorry. But I personally think that it should be more popular than Christmas. That's an argument that we could debate in another video, potentially.
I think probably in the spirit of the video, I think the best advice that we can give to viewers is figure out your own resources, question things, read your own evidence, and delve into why you believe the things that you believe, not just blindly believing them.
Don't be afraid to fight against something that has been told what is true.
And what you believe may be true, but figure out the reasons why.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that the most important thing is
Question everything.
don't ever rely on knowing what is true. It is better to know how to discern between the two. Don't let people tell you what to think, but let them teach you how to think. So, all right. With that, guys, should they subscribe? I don't know.
They should I
absolutely.
don't care.
I've subscribed.
Yeah.
This guy just told me he liked every one of my videos.
Since
so.
the very first video he created on his
You can
YouTube
like
channel.
and subscribe, or you can't. It's up to you.
All right. Well,
But
as
you
a very
definitely
special bonus
should.
to my viewers,
Viewers.
for my viewers,
Classic
we
viewers.
recorded a video about 10 years ago that
No.
I think I'm going to make
No.
available.
No.
I think I'm going to
How
make
did I know?
available.
As soon as you put that on,
I'm going to make available on my channel.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
As soon as
It
you
needs to
said
go
that, I
on.
knew what you were getting
It
at.
wasn't 10 years ago. It was like
That
a
was
few,
like
it was a
it was like
couple years ago.
7 years ago. It had to be like 7
A
years
force
ago.
car in
Or
7
It's like
years.
Gangnam
16.
Style.
Stop.
It wasn't even Gangnam Style.
No,
All right.
it wasn't. It
Which
was,
video are you talking about?
But I'm going to make it
wasn't
available
Gangnam
to the
Style, it
channel
was-
because these fine gentlemen want it.
It's the same thing you think of.
To all of you who watched and endured to the very end, have a blessed night,
Thank
my
you
friends.
very much.
Thank you for watching.
Subscribe, like the video. These guys.